It started with whispers in the break room, the kind that stopped the moment a certain pair of footsteps echoes down the hall. Everyone knew the sound, sharp, steady, and cold. That was Landman's walk. The kind of walk that made people sit straighter, lower their voices, and pretend to look busy. No one really knew when things changed in the office, but everyone agreed on one thing. The moment Landman took over, it stopped feeling like work and started feeling like survival. He was the kind of boss who smiled when everyone else was scared to breathe, who called himself a leader of innovation, but ran the place like a game he had already won. At first, people tried to believe in him. His words were big, his plans even bigger. He talked about building a team that would redefine success, about how he'd make the company unstoppable. He said every rule that slowed people down needed to be broken. HR rules, time off limits, even the idea of personal space. He called them barriers to creativity. The office started changing fast. Posters with "work harder," play never appeared overnight. Team meetings stretched late into the night. Coffee turned into dinner. Dinner turned into excuses to stay longer. And everyone pretended it was fine. Landman didn't shout. He didn't need to. His silence was louder than anger. If he stood behind your desk for too long, it meant you'd done something wrong, even if you didn't know what. Some days, he'd make surprise rounds, stopping behind people, watching their screens without saying a word. Other days, he'd sit in his glass office, eyes moving like a predator waiting for a sign of weakness. HR once tried to speak with him about employee complaints. He smiled, nodded, and later that day, the HR manager found herself reassigned to special projects. No one knew what that meant, but she never came back to her desk. The air in the office grew heavy. People stopped talking about their weekends, their families, their lives. Landman didn't like distractions, he said. He wanted focus, complete focus, the kind that made people forget who they were before they walked into the building. It wasn't just about work anymore. It was about control. Every move, every word, every break had to be justified. Some employees began timing their bathroom visits, afraid of being seen as unproductive. Others started copying Landman's phrases in emails just to sound loyal. Slowly, without anyone noticing, fear became the company culture. What made it worse was that Landman believed he was doing the right thing. He thought rules were meant for weak leaders, and kindness was a waste of time. People respect power, he'd say in meetings, tapping his pen against the table while everyone nodded, even if their stomachs twisted inside. The truth was, no one respected him. They feared him. But fear, when it lasts too long, turns into quiet rebellion. And that quiet rebellion was already growing in whispers, in secret group chats, in glances exchanged when Landman wasn't looking. Something was building, and soon the wildest HR violations in the company's history would come to light. Landman always said he didn't believe in lazy people. In his mind, anyone who wasn't smiling while drowning in work just wasn't motivated enough. So one morning, he came up with a new idea. He called it the Motivation Initiative. The email hit everyone's inbox before sunrise. The subject line said, "Mandatory fun attendance required." Nobody knew what that meant, but everyone knew it couldn't be good. By noon, rumors had already spread. Landman was planning something big. And when Landman planned something big, it usually meant more work, less pay, and a longer week. On Friday, the truth arrived. The mandatory fun was a company team-building retreat. Sounds harmless, right? Except it was scheduled on Saturday, the one day everyone had off. It wasn't optional. The message was clear. If you're part of this team, you show up. Some tried to ask HR if that was allowed. HR shrugged. HR didn't fight anymore. They were as scared as everyone else. And so, on Saturday morning, the office parking lot filled up again. The same tired cars pulling in. The same forced smiles plastered on tired faces. The event took place at a local park. Landman showed up late, wearing sunglasses and holding a whistle. "We're going to build unity today," he said. The silence that followed was louder than applause. He started dividing people into teams, giving them childish challenges, sack races, trust falls, relay runs. The kind of stuff that belonged in summer camp, not a workplace filled with adults who hadn't seen their kids all week. When one employee fell during a trust exercise, Landman laughed. "You've got to learn to catch each other or fail together," he said, pretending it was wisdom. Lunch was worse. He made everyone stand in a circle and share one weakness so the team could help them improve. Some tried to joke, saying things like "I drink too much coffee" or "I talk too fast." Landman didn't laugh. He called out the ones who didn't take it seriously. "You don't get better by hiding your flaws," he said. When one employee admitted they were struggling with confidence, Landman clapped loudly. "Good, now you can start working on that. You'll lead Monday's presentation." The poor guy had never even spoken in front of the team before. No one dared to object. By the end of the day, people were sweaty, exhausted, and humiliated. Landman called it a success. "Look at that energy," he said, snapping photos of people who could barely smile anymore. He posted them on the company's internal site with captions like "Team Spirit in Action." Some employees complained quietly that they hadn't been paid for the day. Landman replied with a smirk, "Motivation isn't something you charge by the hour." It was unpaid overtime, wrapped in fake cheerfulness. HR didn't even file it. The HR officer later admitted she was told, "If you want to stay on this team, don't make paperwork out of progress." The next Monday, something felt broken. The office was quieter than usual. No one wanted to look at each other. The fake smiles were gone. The fun day had turned into another wound everyone pretended not to see. But Landman didn't notice. He saw numbers, attendance, submission times, deadlines met earlier than usual. He thought his experiment had worked. He sent another email titled "Part 2 coming soon." That was the moment some employees started saving screenshots, recording calls, keeping notes. They didn't know what would come next, but they knew they'd need proof. Because when someone like Landman called something motivation, it usually meant another round of punishment dressed as progress. In the break room, people whispered again. "How long do you think this will last?" One asked. "Until someone breaks," another replied. They were right. Because Landman's idea of motivation wasn't about lifting people up, it was about pushing them until they fell apart, just to see who stood back up. He called it leadership. Everyone else called it what it really was, the start of something much darker. Performance reviews used to be private, quiet meetings where people talked about progress, goals, and how to grow. But when Landman decided to reform the feedback system, that privacy vanished overnight. His new rule was simple: no closed doors. Everything was to be done openly, in the name of transparency. The first time it happened, no one believed it was real. The entire team was called into the break room, where Landman stood with a clipboard and a cold smile. "We're trying something new," he said. "We'll review everyone together. That way, we can all learn from each other's mistakes." The word mistakes hung in the air like a knife. He started with the intern. Poor girl had been there for only 3 weeks. Landman read through her report like he was reading a crime scene file. "Your typing speed is fine," he said slowly, "but your initiative is disappointing." The intern nodded silently, her hands shaking around her notebook. Landman looked at her and said, "Don't cry. Take it as a challenge." The room was silent, everyone frozen in place. It wasn't feedback, it was a public display. One by one, he went down the list, calling out people for everything from lack of energy to smiling too much. No one was safe. Even the top performers found themselves under his microscope. He turned every weakness into a lesson, every mistake into a stage performance. By the third meeting, people had started preparing speeches, not for their achievements, but to survive the humiliation. They rehearsed answers that would please him, memorized phrases that sounded like self-criticism but didn't invite attack. Some even learned to laugh at his jokes to avoid being targeted. The reviews turned into theater, the kind where fear was the main actor and dignity was the price of admission. Landman loved it. He paced the room slowly, pretending to listen. then interrupt with sudden questions just to catch someone off guard. If you were me, he'd say, "Would you give yourself a raise?" No one ever dared to say yes. One day, he decided to spice things up. He created a ranking board, a list of every employee's name on a whiteboard, with their performance scores written next to them. The scores weren't based on any system. He gave points to people he liked that week, took them away from those who dared to speak up. It was childish, cruel, and addictive to watch. People started working extra hours just to move their name up by one line. The office became a competition no one agreed to play. HR tried to suggest making the process anonymous. Landman laughed. "Anonymity is for people with something to hide," he said. The worst moment came when one employee, a quiet man who had worked there for years, finally spoke up. He said, "Sir, I think this isn't helping morale." Landman stopped mid-sentence. The room went silent. Then he smiled and said, "Morale? Morale is what losers talk about when they run out of results." Everyone laughed nervously, eyes glued to their coffee cups. The man who spoke up never returned after that week. No one asked why. His desk stayed empty for months, his name slowly fading from memory like it had never existed. By now, even the most loyal employees started to crack. Some stopped trying. Others worked like machines, terrified of falling onto Landman's bad side. Mistakes became crimes. Being average was an offense. Even doing well didn't guarantee safety, because the moment you stood out, you became the next target. Landman's reviews turned into weekly spectacles, and the fear in the room grew so thick you could almost feel it pressing against your skin. People learned to measure their words, their expressions, their silence. Landman believed he was creating warriors, strong, disciplined workers who could handle anything. What he was really creating were ghosts. People who showed up, worked, smiled, and left with their souls half empty. They didn't talk to each other anymore. They didn't laugh. Even HR stopped pretending to help. The office became a stage for one man's ego, and everyone else was just a background actor trying not to get noticed. The reviews didn't make anyone better. They only reminded them of how powerless they were. But deep down, something was shifting again. The whispers were returning. People were starting to realize that Landman's power only existed because no one had dared to challenge it yet. And that realization, small and fragile as it was the first crack in his empire. Landman loved to say he was an open-door leader. He said it like a badge of honor. "My door is always open," he'd boast, as if that made him the kind of boss people could trust. But his version of open door didn't mean what it should. It wasn't about honesty or communication. It was about surveillance, about control, about listening to conversations that weren't meant for him. At first, nobody noticed. It started small, a few strange coincidences. Someone would mention something in private, and the next day, Landman would bring it up in a meeting. People thought it was luck, or maybe gossip spreading fast. But soon, it became clear he knew too much. Way too much. Rumors started to swirl. Someone said they'd seen small black devices plugged into the walls near the meeting rooms. Another said they'd found a recording app open on the office computer when they came in early. HR brushed it off, saying, "That's above our level." Above their level meant Landman's level. And that meant nothing would ever change. Then one day, a quiet employee named Tessa found a tiny microphone under her desk, taped neatly to the bottom. She froze. Her hands trembled as she stared at it. She didn't tell anyone. She just pulled it out, placed it on her keyboard, and went homesick. The next morning, the microphone was gone, and so was Tessa. Her desk was cleared before noon. No one ever mentioned her name again. After that, the silence in the office became heavier. People started watching what they said, even during lunch breaks. Every sentence was calculated, every word filtered. The open-door culture had turned into a minefield. No one knew which conversation might explode next. Landman would walk around smiling, pretending to be approachable, asking things like, "How's everyone feeling today?" The words sounded kind, but everyone knew they were loaded. He wasn't asking how they felt, he was testing who was brave enough to speak. And those who did soon learned what bravery cost. One Monday morning, he held a surprise meeting. Everyone was called into the conference room. The lights were dim, the air thick with confusion. On the screen behind him, a list of names appeared. These, he said calmly, are people who've been spreading negativity in the workplace. His voice was steady, too steady. People stared at the list. There were 8 names. No one knew how he'd gotten them. But deep down, they did. He'd been listening, recording, watching. The accused sat frozen, their faces pale. Landman said it wasn't punishment, it was accountability. He made each of them stand up and explain why their energy had been low. Some apologized. Others denied everything. But it didn't matter. The damage was done. He turned trust into a weapon. After that day, people stopped talking altogether. The break room was empty. Group chats were deleted. Everyone started keeping to themselves. The office became a collection of silent figures staring at screens, afraid that even a sigh could be misunderstood. Landman mistook that silence for respect. "See," he said once, smiling proudly. "Finally, we have peace." But what he called peace was really fear, a deep, spreading fear that ate away at everything human left in the workplace. The open door policy had turned into an invisible cage, and everyone was locked inside. One afternoon, a storm rolled in. Rain hit the windows, thunder echoing through the hallways. HR gathered in a small office, whispering about what to do. One of them, tired and pale, finally said, "If we don't report this soon, it'll destroy us." Another replied, "He is the one we report to." That was the problem. There was no higher ground anymore. Landman had built his empire so tightly around himself that even the people meant to hold him accountable were part of his control. But storms don't last forever. That day, as the rain poured and the lights flickered, someone quietly drafted an email, not to Landman, not to HR, but to corporate headquarters. It was short and simple. Just a few sentences describing everything: the spying, the fear, the violations. The sender didn't sign their name. They just hit send and deleted the evidence. For the first time in months, hope flickered again. Someone had finally broken the silence. No one knew who it was, but everyone could feel it. Something was shifting. The walls that once seemed solid were starting to crack. Landman still smiled his cold smile, still paced the halls like a king who believed his crown was permanent. But behind his back, whispers were growing again, stronger than before. The open door he used to spy on his people was about to swing open for real, and this time, it wouldn't be him standing on the other side.